Train enthusiasts consider Postwar Lionel Trains manufactured by the original Lionel Corporation from 1945 through 1969 the most collectible toy trains. These trains are considered a safe investment, in great part because of the Standards Committee of the Train Collectors Association. The TCA, with over 27,000 members worldwide, was founded in 1954 at Yardley, Pennsylvania. The purposes of TCA are to further the hobby of collecting toy trains by publishing a periodical and other information for collectors, to establish standards by description, to hold meetings providing an interchange of ideas and information, and to promote fellowship among collectors. The largest TCA show, sponsored by the Eastern Division, is held each April and October in York, Pennsylvania, attracting 12,000 members and guests. The TCA Standards Committee has established marking standards and made other requirements of members who are manufacturers or dealers. In most cases, the letter R stamped into the part, as on this reproduction helicopter, would be sufficient. The R indicates the item is a reproduction. Not every manufacturer or dealer is a member of TCA, and unfortunately there are those who do not comply with the marking standards. Their motivation is to make money on the reproduction market at any cost. In the past few years, the safest investment scenario has been threatened, and many prospective buyers have shied away. They don't want to get taken advantage of. Our motivation is to inform and to protect the collector. To fully understand repaints and reproductions, we must start at the beginning. The first post-war Lionel reproductions were actually repainted cabs or shells of the more popular FM or F3 diesels. During the early 1970s, when repaints became popular, the sales pitch was to provide collectors with an example to run so their valuable original would not be damaged. The symbol for these early repaints is probably the 2341 Jersey Central. Countless stories have been told explaining why a repaint was purchased instead of an original. Joe Algozzini explains.
In March of 1973, I purchased this repainted Jersey Central. I knew it was a repaint, but I figured I'd never see an original, much less own one. During the early 1970s, there weren't many train shows like we have today. Most of the trains were purchased at hobby shops, flea markets, or an occasional auction. The feeling conveyed to train collectors was that everything was rare, and you may never get a second chance to buy.
In this instance, Joe purchased more than just a repainted shell. He purchased the entire unit, chassis and all. The nice thing about this repaint is that the individual left his calling card. The inside is clearly marked, custom painted by Richard Sherry. The gray plastic shell tells us this is a repaint. Original Jersey Centrals were painted over blue plastic shells. Rich Sherry stripped an original Lackawanna for his Jersey Central repaint. Ed Kramer was another well-known custom painter during the early 1970s, who also marked the inside of his repainted shells. Ed printed articles explaining certain differences between originals and reproductions, like this example shown in Howard Godell's 1976 classic, Antique Toy Trains. The real problem occurs if the markings are removed by some unscrupulous individual trying to make a profit. When you're not allowed to remove the shell from the frame for inspection, here's how to identify an original.
Before I even handle the item, I look for certain indicators that tell me something may be wrong. From this distance and angle, I would suspect this to be a repaint because the FM decal is bright, unlike an original that tends to yellow. Of course, this could still be an original that had a worn-out decal replaced. With a closer look, I've noticed something much more revealing. The indicator is the blue stripe located beneath the headlight. On an original, the stripe is scooped, whereas most reproductions are not. Some custom painters have learned about the scooping, which makes the next indicator the most important. An original Jersey Central was heat stamped, as the lettering and numbers were imprinted into the plastic. Repaints use a process of silk screening or dry transfers, and the lettering and numbers rest on top of the plastic. Even the original box has been reproduced.
The 2347 Chesapeake and Ohio GP7 is one of the scarcest diesels of the post-war era. The engine was part of set 9836 and was featured on page 463 of the 1965 Sears Christmas catalog. Today, the asking price of a 2347 rivals that of the Jersey Central.
The indicator for repainted 2347s is easy to identify because the repaints use silkscreen lettering and numbers. The Lionel original used heat stamp lettering and numbers. Quite often, original 2365 C&O shells are repainted, relettered, and renumbered. The repaint is placed back on the original 2365 frame, which provides another indicator. An original frame for a 2347 was different. It included a horn and therefore needed a horn and battery cover. A frame can be changed easily and repainted to look like that of a 2347. All that has to be done is to fill in the last two numbers. We wouldn't call this procedure a repaint or custom painting. We would call this a fake.
Another diesel that's been altered is the 2338 Milwaukee Road GP7 with the all-around orange plastic cab.
This engine is as rare and valuable as a 2347 Sears C&O. The most important indicator of originality is the Milwaukee Road Herald, which when altered is a decal. Lionel did not use a decal for the Milwaukee Road. The Herald was rubber stamped. Even the number 2338 is decaled, whereas the original was also rubber stamped. Another sign of alteration is the orange area below the cab window showing evidence of black paint, which indicates the black paint was stripped. When we took the cab off the frame, we noticed the orange plastic wasn't translucent, as were original all around Milwaukee roads.
Not all shells were repainted to look like a Lionel original. This custom-painted Golf Mobile in Ohio by Rich Sherry and Monon by Kevin Hagee would look good running on anyone's layout. If the Jersey Central is the symbol for repainted diesels, then the most likely candidate for repainted rolling stock would be the 6427-60 Virginian caboose. The repainted Virginian caboose made its debut during the middle 1970s, and the lettering and numbering were applied by the same silk screening process as covered with the diesels. By early 1975, known examples of this repainted caboose were sold through Madison Hardware in New York City. The selling price was usually around $29.95, which was a realistic price, considering that originals sold in the neighborhood of $100.
A regular production 6427 Lionel Lines caboose was used for the repainted Virginian. Before the painting process began, certain sections of the rivet detail were sanded down. This was done so the rivets wouldn't interfere with the silk screening process. Original Virginian cabooses are often mistaken for repaints because it appears that rivet detail has been removed. However, close inspection reveals the rivets were smashed when the heat stamp lettering was applied.
Another problem for collectors is the original heat stamp lettering is faint and is sometimes mistaken for silk screening. A lighted magnifying glass is a great tool for identification.
The box for the repainted Virginian caboose has been altered. The original Virginian box used the same box as the 6427, but the number 1 was blacked out and the number 60 was added in the same blue letter press style. The altered box also had the number 1 blacked out, but the style of black print is condensed and completely different than an original.
The most collectible and valuable of all the variations of 6464 boxcars is probably the 6464-300 with what collectors refer to as a solid shield. The difference between this rare car and the regular production model is the herald is filled in.
When examining for fake solid shield Rutlands, the first thing to look for is the way the lettering and numbers are applied. The Rutland boxcar was cataloged by Lionel in 1955 and 1956. 1955 models were rubber stamped. 1956 models were heat stamped, and the spacing on the left side of the car was different. The solid shield Rutland was an early 1955 experimental model and therefore must have rubber stamp lettering.
When this boxcar is faked, 1955 examples are used. The reason is the rubber stamping can be completely removed without leaving any trace of lettering. A 1956 example would leave the imprint of the heat stamped lettering. The most important indicator is whether the solid shield Rutland's herald is original or not. Most fake solid shields have only the right side herald removed and then replaced with a fake herald, which is usually silk screened. The rubber stamping on the right side of the car must, and let us reiterate, must, match perfectly with the rubber stamping on the left side. This solid shield herald does not match the style of rubber stamping on the left side of the car and is a fake. The bad news is that some solid shield boxcars have been faked using the same style stamping and paint for both sides of the car. When this happens, you either have to be familiar with an original or get an original for comparison. Before purchasing, it's a good idea to get the seller's name, especially since the asking price for a solid shield Rutland is usually over $2,500.
One last clue. The green paint used for the roof and sides of a solid shield Rutland was glossy. The rest of the car was unpainted yellow plastic. Sometimes overspray of glossy green paint will show on the unpainted yellow plastic body. This is a common occurrence. When a common boxcar is faked, the duller green painted area is covered with a glossy coating. This coating can spill onto the unpainted yellow plastic and exposes it as a fake. The reason is the glossy coating makes the yellow plastic body glossy. Finally, images reflected off the glossy green paint of an original reflect more clearly, whereas images on a reproduction are blurred. This same procedure of using a glossy coating is also used to fake glossy Jersey Centrals.
The most mysterious and controversial car of the Postwar Lionel era is without a doubt the Heinz pickle car. Much of the mystique surrounding this car was fueled by early articles and publications. The first mention of the car is found in the January 1968 issue of the Train Collectors Quarterly, in an article written about the compatibility of certain American Flyer couplers, and not specifically on the Heinz pickle car. Other listings can be found in the 1969 spring issue of Toy and Train and the 1970 Illustrated Lionel Checklist. Both were produced by Ladd Publications, and there weren't any photographs, only a brief description stating the car was uncatalogued. The legend of the Heinz pickle car developed as collectors everywhere wanted to add this rare car to their collection. Each publication left an indicator showing something was wrong. How was it that the Heinz pickle car even showed up in the first place?
The 1968 article stated the car on the right was a Lionel 6475 Heinz pickle vat car from 1965, but the black and white photo showed a plastic coupler with a shiny knuckle pin. The shiny knuckle pin is part of a three-piece knuckle. The three-piece knuckle was phased out in late 1961 production and into 1962 in favor of a one-piece Delrin plastic knuckle. If the article was right and the Heinz pickle car was made in 1965, why the 1961 knuckle? The two lad listings each showed the same photo of a 6475 Libby's pineapple car. An original Lionel car had a crushed pineapple label applied over a gray plastic vat. However, the Heinz labels were applied over a regular production 1960s pickle vat. Why weren't the Heinz labels produced in the same manner as the Libby's? By coincidence, I called Joe Ranker on October 27, 1983, while conducting an investigation on chemically altered Lionel and American Flyer trains. Joe Ranker was a well-known collector who had his Lionel 6464 boxcars featured in a 1965 Railroad Model Craftsman three-part article. Some 6464 boxcars had been chemically altered, and I was hoping Joe might have some information. Although he wasn't familiar with chemically altered cars, Joe surprised me by saying he once created a car of his own. That car was the legendary Heinz pickle car. He said the car wasn't made to fool anyone, just to help sell unwanted 6475 pickle cars. Back in the late 1960s, nobody wanted pickle cars. You couldn't even move them at $3 each.
Joe had the labels made up by a friend who was a printer, and although he wasn't too happy with the artwork, he said he received around 250 labels, so he made around 60 Heinz pickle cars. Placing the Heinz labels over regular production 6475 pickle cars was a blessing, because he finally sold out. The price for his creation was $8 each, and operators had something new to run on a layout. Even as a curio, Greenberg rates the value of a Heinz pickle car between $100 and $150. Some individuals even take the Heinz pickle vats from the 1974 MPC issue, worth around $25, and place them on a 6475 car. Another way to make a fast dollar.
Joe Ranker recently mentioned if he knew there would be all this fuss, he never would have made the labels in the first place. In the 1962 John Wayne classic, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, a statement is made very late in the movie. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. Now it's time to put the Heinz pickle car legend to rest.
On a lighter, almost comical note is the Madison Hardware Original Man. In this November 1984 issue of Model Railroader, he's listed on page 141 as Original Man, will fit most cars and accessories. The Original Man appears on Lionel cars and accessories at train shows, hobby shops, and collections everywhere. However, he is not Original Lionel, only an Original Man, and that was exactly what the advertisement stated. It's obvious the Original Man isn't Original Lionel, yet many collectors are convinced otherwise.
There are plenty of indicators. He's too short. His face is painted white instead of flesh, and he's molded in purple instead of blue. He has a single slot at his base instead of one that's T-shaped, which is the type used by Lionel starting in 1959.
Because so many locomotives were repainted or restored during the early to middle 70s, the demand for reproduction parts increased as original parts were depleted. Handrails for FMs, boiler fronts and side rods for steam engines, horns and portholes for F3s, and pantographs for GG1s were just some of the parts reproduced during the early 1970s. As the 1980s rolled along, the asking price for postwar Lionel trains continued to climb to record heights, and the need for more reproduction parts became apparent. The stage was set for mass production of a new type of reproduction, as dealers flooded the market with loads and accessories. Some of the first reproduction loads included metal pipes for the 2411 pipe car and tubes for the 6469 liquefied gas tank car. Reproduction accessory parts included culverts for the culvert loader and baggage men for the operating freight station. The reproduction part that's caused collectors and dealers the most problems in the past few years is the green generator for the 6520 operating searchlight car. The reason is the asking price for an original is usually over $400. Much has been written about the Repro green generator. It's lighter in weight, the screw holes aren't centered, and it's more translucent than an original. However, what happens if the seller will not allow the part to be removed?
First of all, who wants to carry a postage scale to a train show? The reason the screw holes aren't centered is the reproduction is shorter. Remember, original Lionel dies aren't being used. What we need is something that tells us the part is a reproduction without having to remove it. The key identifier is the grill work. On the original, the entire grill is visible. The reproduction has a flaw in the die and the grill work is distorted.
The newest reproduction parts to enter the marketplace can be used to repair the pyro military loads that were made for Lionel flat cars. The reason is obvious. These vehicles were fragile and broke easily. Robert Geller, who owns the Pyro trademark and dies, has manufactured the reproductions. He's also marked each part with a letter in raised plastic. Original Lionel parts used a number, which sometimes appeared to be scratched. A reproduction operator seat uses the letter M. This original has the number 5 scratched on. Sound detectors use the letter R. Originals have a number. This reproduction swivel, called a yoke, shows the letter B. The original has a number, and it is on the center support. The anti-aircraft gun has the letter M. The original has a number. A reproduction searchlight uses the letter L. The original used a number. The reproduction lens is virtually identical to an original. However, the repro searchlight and lens are only sold as one piece and are glued together. During the 1970s and 80s, many of the post-war Lionel flat cars offered for sale at hobby shops or train shows were missing their original loads. Dealers eventually took advantage of this situation, and the era of the reproduction load was in full swing. In this video, we'll cover 3 repro loads that have caused confusion with collectors and dealers. They can also add over $250 to the asking price of a car, even though the load isn't original.
It's really a shame these were reproduced because the originals were very scarce, and now the reproductions have stolen the spotlight. Like many of today's reproductions, the green and brown autos are shorter than the original. The color of the green reproduction is different from an original, whereas the brown reproduction is almost the same. The color variances are difficult to determine if you don't have an original with to compare. There is some good news, however. The manufacturer of the repro autos left the Lionel Corporation data off the bottom of the frame. This may have been done to avoid any confrontations with Lionel Trains Incorporated. There is also one slight problem. Reproduction autos in the common colors, red, yellow, blue, and white, were sold by Madison Hardware during the 1980s. The frames for these autos have the Lionel Corporation data on the bottom of the frame. Our recommendation in this case is easy. If you're thinking of buying an original green or brown auto at a train show or hobby shop, just take along a ruler for good measure. An original is over 4.5 inches bumper to bumper, whereas a reproduction is not.
Reproduction red over white and white over red airplanes were manufactured to look different than an original. Original airplanes have the name Bonanza heat stamped on the fuselage and the data N2742B heat stamped on the wings. Reproduction airplanes do not. Originals have 4 rivets holding the wing sections together. Reproductions have 3. The Lionel Corporation line was left off Reproductions. However, some earlier reproduction airplanes were made with the Lionel Corporation line. An insert was used with the die which left an outline around the Lionel Corporation. This outline is visible on all the reproduction airplanes made, regardless of color. One last observation reveals the plastic connecting the opening on the bottom of the fuselage is thicker on an original than on the reproduction. These minor differences are your tools in distinguishing reproductions. The flat car with a tank, included in the 1964 Sears set 9820, has confused collectors, dealers, and publishers for years. The tank wasn't made by Lionel. The tank was made by Peyton and used with their own product line of toys, like these 1962 and 63 examples, which predate the 1964 Lionel version. Set 9820 was a Sears or Allstate exclusive and contains some of the rarest examples of post-war Lionel trains. The 240 steamer, 3666 cannon firing boxcar, and 347 cannon firing range set are very scarce and valuable. If the components of this set are scarce, then it would make sense the tank would also be scarce. The problem is collectors and dealers offer the pre-1964 tank as the Lionel Sears original. Here's how you tell the difference.
It makes sense that if Lionel decided to let Peyton Products manufacture a tank for the Lionel line, then Peyton must have sent Lionel many different examples from which to choose. Could these same examples have been used to fill orders for set 9820? We don't know. But we do know at the time of production for the Lionel tank, Peyton made a change to the die that made the turret. Some grinding was done on the die to provide for a better flow of plastic and also resulted in a fuller cannon. This is easily distinguishable when compared to the earlier example. Besides the olive color, this new die flow characteristic is all you need to spot an original. Reproduction tanks were made in the mid-1980s. They were much shorter than the Peyton tank. The reproduction turret also has the die flow, but the shape is different. Another indicator is the original Peyton turret had a small R or Q in raised letters on the part. The reproduction also had the letter Q, but it was much larger and placed in a different location.
A general rule of thumb among experienced collectors is, if the color hasn't been reported to the Greenberg guides by now, it probably isn't an original. Blue is the correct color of plastic for the 51 U.S. Navy switcher. This switcher spent an entire summer in a child's sandbox. One side was protected from the sun's rays, while the other wasn't. A noticeable change in the color of plastic is the result. If a 334 dispatching board is left unprotected for many years near a furnace in a smoke-filled and damp basement, will this change the outside color of plastic? Something did change the color of this 334, as further inspection of the inside color of plastic reveals. Final production of the Stop, Look, and Listen video had begun when we were made aware that at least one version of the Pyro military trucks is currently being reproduced. We felt this news warranted your immediate attention. Besides the omission of the Pyro logo on the inside of the cab, the 6 holes on the bottom of the frame are also missing on the reproduction.